welcome. We're here to talk about the STEM Pathways project, and I'm your tour guide for today. My name is Beth Murphy. Some of you know me from the Bakken Museum, but today my capacity is as the project coordinator for the STEM Pathways project. I want to introduce my three colleagues here and my one virtual one who will show up eventually. You have Kim Van Wee from Starbase, Minnesota, Stephen Walvig from the Bakken Museum, who you've already met, and Joe Alfano from the Minneapolis Public Schools, who's the elementary STEM coordinator. Doug Paulson from the Minnesota Department of Education will be joining us as well, and he has a few things to say. The five of us represent a portion of what's called the planning team for the STEM Pathways project, and we're going to tell you a lot more about it right now. Kim will start, and as you all know, with any invention or any idea, any new invention, it's usually based on something that came before. And so, what we're talking about today is an idea that's based on things that we've learned from the past. And so Kim will start off by telling us about that, and then what the kind of ideas of where we're going, and then we'll be able to tell you a lot more. So essentially, she'll tell us about the need and opportunity, the motivation behind this. I'll talk a little bit about our plans. Other people will jump in, what we're doing right now, and why all of us are doing it. The Minneapolis Public Schools, the Department of Education, and a handful of the STEM community organizations in the metro area, and where we're going, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions as well.
Great, thank you, Beth. Again, my name is Kim Van Wee, and I'm the director of Starbase Minnesota. And just for the context of kind of the beginning, Starbase is a 501c3 nonprofit organization who, like many of us, are trying to educate and inspire students in STEM. And our particular program is a program of the Department of Defense, which is a little bit surprising sometimes, but did start by some educators in the state of Michigan who saw the resources of the Michigan National Guard and thought, wow, what a great backdrop to teach STEM. So Starbase Minnesota has been around for 20 years. It's a 5-day program, and it's 20 hours total. So we have a chance to get students completely immersed in STEM. It's a very comprehensive curriculum, and we do a lot with metrics to analyze what we do. With those metrics and the pre and post testing that we've done over 20 years, we have lots of data, and the measurements that we do when it comes to students is trying to measure knowledge, skills, and interest in STEM, as well as interest in STEM careers. So we're always been curious about what the long-term impacts of our program have been. And so a few years ago, we engaged Wilder Research in a longitudinal study. And we found some really interesting and surprising results. One is that the students had incredible detail about their experience at Starbase 8 to 10 years ago, which was a very nice surprise. And while this is not the entire gist of the study, some interesting data among the data was what you see up there on the screen, that 99% of these students surveyed thought Starbase was valuable, 83% felt that Starbase helped them understand STEM better, and reported that it increased their interest in STEM by 79%, and in some cases had a positive impact on graduation enrollment into college. However, and this was really important, they were not entering STEM careers at any higher rate. So a lot of the stats you saw this morning or in the previous session, were consistent with what we are finding. So we and several of the partners that are up here and in the room have thought about this a lot, and what can we do to help increase the long-term impact of our programs collectively. And so we formed a hypothesis. And our hypothesis is that if students receive multiple touch points across the years that are connected to each other and cohesive as in a pathway, and that they recognize that they're actually within this group of collective people working on their behalf in STEM, an illuminated pathway that will help to increase their not only long-term results, but their short-term results as well. So that's the premise for this project and the premise for the evaluation that accompanies it. So in the process of then talking to people and gathering them and everybody, it just seemed to be a project whose time has come. We've heard that said many times among the partners that we were talking to. We all wanted to kind of work better together, not just at the higher level, the 30,000 foot level, advocacy level, but also really at the ground level where we're interacting with students. So our metrics are focused largely on student outcomes, and you can see them, our goals of the project right up there on the screen. You know, that the students have increased STEM experiences in and out, so that's the participation, the multiple touch points, that they realize they're on the STEM path of connected experiences, that our partner experiences somehow connect with each other across the years. And then of course the counterpart to participation is that quality of participation, so we want high quality, relevant experiences. And then of course the measurements that we hope to find and the results we hope to find academically and also attitudinally. Beyond this, then, we developed more specifics around these indicators, and we got into a lot of detail about what that really means, and developed a rubric that you should have in your packet right now, and if anybody doesn't have one, just raise your hand, and we'll bring them around. On the rubric, you'll see those indicators that I just talked about, but also, we also assign levels too, you know, the most basic level to all the way up to higher impact. So we spent a lot of time developing this rubric and then also the next steps, developing the program to achieve these outcomes.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of information about where we're headed. And as Kim had mentioned, the STEM Pathways program is a partnership between Minneapolis Public Schools, Minnesota Department of Education, and right now, 7 Twin Cities nonprofit STEM organizations, where our focus, this has grown out of an unfunded NSF proposal, where we're operating on a shoestring and everybody is really committed, which is very exciting. The focus was to look at 4th through 8th grade. The programming, well, you'll see this in a bit, the programming that we'll be offering will be focused on 4th and 5th grade. And we really are operating on 2 fronts at the same time. One is forming the collaboration, the connections, the coherent STEM pathway that will have to do with implementation of programming by partner organizations connected with the science that happens in the Minneapolis Public Schools, science and engineering, and then also a research component. And Wilder Research is working with us and developing the evaluation plan, which we'll talk about in a little bit, to understand what the impact is on students, also on teachers, on schools, and also on the organizations that are participating. And you know, kind of the way that I envision what we're trying to do is taking all of these great STEM programs that are serving kids in the Minneapolis Public Schools, but right now are pretty much operating in parallel. And some of these already are communicating with each other, but we aren't necessarily in a really strong way that's completely interwoven with each other. And so a big part of what we're doing right now is starting to weave our work together, maintain the uniqueness of what each organization and each program has to offer, but yet find ways where we can be reinforcing each other's work, connecting to each other, and having that be really visible for students and teachers.
Yeah, can you hear me from here? No.
Yeah. The video can't.
Okay. It's hard getting in and out, but thank you. How about now? I really like this image. When Beth came up with it a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the program, images kind of help me think a little bit deeper and help me understand the relationships. And it almost acts as a model for what we're trying to do. And I think it's significant for the images we didn't choose. We didn't choose like a melting pot or like a stew where all these ingredients are being thrown in. In this weave, you know, all the programs remain their uniqueness. And what's interesting and what's different about this slide from the last one is three of the weaves are Minneapolis Public Schools, because part of the problem is not only working with outside partners because we all have our own focuses, but within a school district as large as Minneapolis, we also have a focus from the curriculum and instruction department, what's going on during the day, and also what's going on after school, and also in between different partnerships we have within the school day, like the Engineering as Elementary program. But with the Weave, these pieces remain unique because they are unique, but altogether they create a stronger program for students.
And just to give you a little bit of an overview about implementation, this is our plan for the next 3 years. Right now, we're kind of in the development phase, discovery phase, and that will continue throughout. We'll be working with 4th and 5th grade students at 6 Minneapolis public schools, and we'll start this coming school year with programming in the 4th and 5th grade, and then cycle through. Part of our research plan is to look at what's going on with students after they've been through this pathway as well. So the 6th and 7th graders, for example, will be looking at, collecting information from them, but they won't be specifically receiving any of the programming. Okay, so to tell you a little bit about what we're looking for, the point I want to make is the outcomes that Kim presented at the beginning and that rubric that you all have in your hands is really our touchstone. Everything that we're doing, from our collaborative work to the way we're measuring success, all reflects back to that, and it's a really powerful system, I think. Our decision-making around what all of the partners do when we're together really go back to that, and you'll see examples of that in a few minutes. So, part of any good research plan is to understand what works and what doesn't work, and so that's part of what we're looking at, and what are the characteristics of success so that it can be expanded or replicated elsewhere. And that information will be collected from a wide variety of people. What is referred to here as professional development is not necessarily professional development as you may have experienced it in your own worlds. It's an interesting process where we're letting other people, the people who, from all of the partner organizations who are actually the ones that are working directly with students, be our guides in determining what we need to do in order to achieve the student outcomes we're looking for. And so it's a really careful dance of staying a couple steps ahead of yourself, but being open to all of the information that is coming in from the people that know students best and the people that are the best educators of students. There's a few, so the first part was about implementation evaluation, what works, what doesn't work, what leads to success. And then we're also looking too about what happens with students. What are we seeing in terms of short and long-term outcomes? What works for the students? What change do we see in their knowledge and attitudes? And also, what's the impact on the STEM organizations that are participating? And in fact, the impact on Minneapolis public schools and even the Department of Education. So I'm going to invite a few of our representatives here right now to talk about what we're doing. I'm going to give you a quick overview of kind of our operating values, though. First of all, this is an extremely collaborative project. There isn't one boss. There isn't one person telling us what to do. It's messy, but it's incredibly fun and very empowering to work with a planning committee that's larger than this, about twice the size, and after a fairly lengthy meeting, all kind of come to the same page and all leave very excited. We also very much believe, and that Weave represents this, that what we are doing, we can do better together than we can do alone. And I think that there's kind of a model of that assumes that somehow the silver bullet's going to be found, right? There's one organization out there that is doing something really amazing for kids in STEM, and if we all just do what they do, the miracle is going to happen. And I don't think that's the way it works. Somehow we need to all work together, determine, really buy into what, find that shared vision that we're all trying to achieve. And together we're going, a collective impact model where what's really going to happen, the change that's going to happen is going to happen because of collaboration, not because of competition. As I mentioned, we don't know exactly how to do it yet, but we know enough to figure it out. And this process of taking input from all of the partners and from the people that are at our planning meetings and professional development helps a lot. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, the decision-making, how we're going to achieve the outcomes, is driven by those who know students best and know the programs best. It's not a top-down approach. We have people from the planning team here presenting today. I hope next year we'll have people who are working directly with students, sharing their experiences with you as well. So some examples of our work to date, and I am going to invite Kim to start with this one.
Okay, what we do at each of our workshops with the larger partner group is to kind of take a chunk out of this rubric and try to move it down the road, and it's been really successful doing so. So I'm going to give you an example of some of our work. You know, we talked about wanting the students to know that they're on this pathway, that we are all linking arms, we're all looking at who's being involved in STEM, what they're going to do next after it's star-based, before star-based, after the Bakken, what. We've got our eyes on them. So, you know, we wanted to come up with a visual way to show that we're all connected. And here's a great example of collaboration that may not have been done before. We had an instructor from Starbase and a instructor program person from the Bakken get together and kind of brainstorm about what a collective graphic could look like. Now, we haven't really finalized this yet, and on the next page, we'll show you just some models that they tested against the group and got input on. But it's an example that ultimately will decide on a graphic that will show up at all these different places. So when a student comes in, maybe they'll see that icon in the window, maybe they'll see it in their student workbook or some of the materials that they take with it, and they'll say, wait a minute, I saw that at the Minnesota Zoo, I saw that at the Works, I saw that here and there, and then get the idea that, you know, we want these these STEM experiences to keep going on and on. They're not done when they're done at the Bakken or the Works or Starbase or the Bell Museum. They've got more work to do. They've got more steps on the path to take. Well, actually, I'll go ahead because I think that's where we ended up when we're deciding, you know, who's going to take what. If you're not convinced already about, you know, the benefits of this, we'll give you one example. One of the things on a rubric is, you know, of course, that we're knowledgeable. In order to connect our programs up, we have to be knowledgeable about what each other is doing. So that's one thing. So about a year ago this time, I sent one of my instructors who actually was doing her master's paper at the U of M. And I said, can you go around to these different STEM partners, look at their programs, and see if you can find some kind of connecting thread between them. And while we may be a little way from finding a connecting thread, there's a lot of different ways to connect the programs, but we were kind of thinking actually a connecting storyline eventually. One of the things she did discover, though, in this process is that there were 6 different engineering design process models being used at these different organizations. So, you know, that was one of the things that we demonstrated at our first workshop, actually, is we've got all these models out there. Now, as Beth said, we're all, you know, individual. Yet we want to also make this easier for kids. So we're not saying we all have to agree on one model, but we do have to be knowledgeable about what each other is doing and make those translations for kids. So this was just one real live demonstration of how this need is there and what we can do to strengthen outcomes for kids.
So as just one example, one of the things that we ended up looking at were some of the program models that we have, both at Starbase and the Minnesota Zoo, and trying to think about how do these connect. So if you're an educator and you're teaching at Starbase, if you're an educator teaching at the Minnesota Zoo, and you know that your students in front of you are going to go to one of these other institutions, how do you build that story for them? How do you tell them something that'll help them in their mind's eye remember, oh, right, the bigger picture, the bigger story, the bigger concept is. And I get that because I'm seeing it now in a number of different organizations in a number of different ways. So I really get that there's a bigger picture in STEM. It's not just, here's a particular content item, but, you know, what is the bigger picture? A lot of times we talk about those as cross-cutting concepts, the things that really weave everything together. So as an example, just kind of showing on the screen here, Starbase, of course, talks about mission to Mars, and how could you possibly have people living on Mars if that's our goal, if that's sort of the survival of the human species, is to somehow get out there and, blaze a new path. Well, what do we need to do to lay the groundwork to make that possible? And of course, when you think about the Minnesota Zoo, you think about habitats. How do we keep all these precious resources, these animals that we want to continue on into our future, so our children, our children's children can see, hear, maybe even feel these animals, and really get inspired by the natural world? Well, that's the challenge that scientists and engineers in both these institutions and both these endeavors have to think about. And as educators, what we can do is we can really tell a central theme, a story about habitat and about systems and about energy transfer that are common across all these things. So if you're trying to develop a habitat for animals in the zoo, or you're trying to develop a habitat for humans on Mars, you really need to employ the same sort of sciences and the same sort of engineering. And that type of thinking is the type of thinking that we're hoping really brings students' attention to the bigger picture and helps them understand that there's a huge variety of solutions that are out there that they can be a part of as they think about career choices and what they want to do next in their lives.
The thing I just want to add about this is this particular work that the slide represents was developed by 2 educators from those 2 organizations, but then they facilitated an hour-long, approximately, session with the larger group, where we then had different pairs of organizations working together, of educators in those organizations, discovering what the connections were in seemingly very different STEM programs. I think Joe and Doug, I think, are...
Trying to fall off stage here? That would be exciting, though, to fall off stage. I think the next part is aligning with standards and aligning with each other. We have some excellent programmings. Lucky to live and work in a state like Minnesota where we do have such high-quality programs. But when we talk about quality, relevant STEM experiences, we're not talking about each individual isolated experience. It needs to be a collective, cohesive package for our students so they can see those connections. And so really, part of this effort is to say, how do we start to align the programs with each other, connect them, get that weave together, while also connecting it into the larger system, and through that, connecting it in with standards. And so one of the things, we've had a couple different learning opportunities as a group, and this is just opening discussions for the conversations. Learning where each program is at, building the capacity that starts to exist. First of all, we started to look at what does it mean to be in argument, be in scientific argumentation. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What language do we use for our students so that they understand claims, evidence, reasoning going from one organization to the next? So again, it's not an isolated experience, so we're using this type of language around these practices in this location and this other set in this other location, but we have a cohesive, connected point. And so basing that back into the current research from the framework for K-12 science education. Later, we started taking a look at what does it mean to be aligned to standards? What does Minneapolis do around that? They have an excellent look where they have developed learning targets, taking standards, putting it into student-friendly language of what do we want to see the students to be able to do or demonstrate when they are showing mastery in that skill or that concept. We started to take a look at that and what does that mean within our programs? And so Joe led through a conversation of developing learning targets. Again, it's part of that conversation so that we can start to look at a cohesive program with the school day programs in Minneapolis, bringing in partners so that we have a cohesive package. It's messy at some points in time because it is a process, but it's an exciting process and something that we're starting to see some of those consistent languages or at least references between programs.
Thank you, Doug. Now, one point I want to make is what we're doing right now this year is a lot of working meetings, working professional development with, I don't know, we probably have, how many people? 30, 40 people at each session. And an exciting thing is that the participation hasn't dropped off. In fact, we're maintaining, or the number of participants seems to be going up as we go on, which is a great sign when people are sacrificing half their day for maybe one beverage and a granola bar.
And not a strong beverage either.
No, a coffee or a soda, maybe a water. And that the benefits that they're gaining from being part of this collaboration make it worth their while to be doing that. Right now, the participants in that are primarily the informal STEM education educators and planning team members and things like that. Eventually, we need to figure out too, that's only one piece of the collaboration. We do have some Minneapolis teachers who are representing an after-school program, a STEM program in the district, but we still are figuring out, how are the authentic connections made after we figure out how to make them between the nonprofit organizations. How do we then make that be really real at the implementation level within classrooms and schools as well? I wanted to invite 3 of our panelists up here just to give a very brief snippet as why their organizations are involved in this work, why their organizations are allowing them and people they work with in their organizations to commit time to this project when we're operating on a shoestring, and what value they see. So I'm going to invite Joe and Doug and Steve up here to tell you a little bit about that, and then we have just a couple more quick slides, and then hopefully some questions.